That horse should have been dead. Royce Barrett could see the whole story from the ridge, the torn scrub brush, the scattered stones on the slope, the dark stains on the rocks below that told of a nasty fall. Yet there she was, a chestnut mare standing at the edge of his property, a deep gash on her leg still bleeding. But she was alive. Royce had been living alone for 3 years. He avoided people. He avoided questions. He avoided anything that reminded him of what he'd lost. His life was a simple, brutal rhythm. Check the cattle, mend the fences, eat in silence, sleep when exhaustion finally won. But this injured horse was about to change everything. She was favoring her wounded leg, her coat matted with blood and dirt. Royce grabbed a rope, ready to lead her to his corral. But when he got close, she did something strange. She moved away, not in a panic, but with purpose. She took a few steps toward the eastern hills, then stopped and looked back at him. As if to say, "Are you coming?" Royce had seen trained horses before, animals taught to lead a rider somewhere specific. This wasn't instinct. This was a mission. Someone had taught this horse to guide people, and that someone was in trouble. Against every rule he had made for himself, Royce decided to follow. The mare led him into the rough country east of his land, a place of steep hills and narrow valleys, a place people went when they didn't want to be found. That should have been his first warning, but the horse was determined, looking back every few minutes to make sure he was still there. Someone was depending on this wounded animal. Someone's life was on the line. After an hour, the mare stopped on the crest of a ridge. Below them, tucked into a fold of land, was a small wooden shack. It was almost invisible from any other direction. Smoke rose from its chimney. The mare limped down the slope. Her job was done. Royce followed, a cold feeling creeping into his gut. He had no idea that what waited in that hidden shack would force him to choose. He could keep the safety of his isolation, or he could step into a storm of trouble that might just swallow him whole. The steps creaked. The shack looked even worse up close. The boards were warped, the gaps between them wide enough to see the darkness inside. But someone was in there. The smoke from the chimney smelled of burning pine. He could hear faint movements. He hesitated at the door. 3 years of solitude had made him a stranger to a simple knock. Before he could decide, a voice called out from within, weak but clear. "Please, if someone's out there, please come in." It was a woman, and her voice was filled with a desperation he knew all too well. He pushed the door open. The room was dim, lit only by a dying fire. On a rough mattress in the corner, a woman lay covered in thin blankets. Her face was pale, exhausted, but her eyes were sharp, and they fixed on him with a frightening intensity. "You followed the horse," she said. It wasn't a question. Royce just nodded. His voice felt like a rusted tool. "She's been going out every day for a week," the woman whispered. "I was starting to think no one would come." "Who are you?" Royce finally managed. She tried to sit up, then fell back against the pillow. "My name is Clara Whitmore," she breathed. "And I'm dying." The words hit him like a physical blow. The cold feeling in his stomach turned to ice. He had walked away from all of this. From pain. From caring. "There's something else," she whispered, her eyes shifting to a dark corner of the room. "I'm not alone." A child stepped out of the shadows. A little girl, no more than 5, with tangled hair and clothes that hung off her small frame. She watched him with the weary eyes of an old soul. "This is Emma," Clara said. "She's why I sent the horse." The little girl didn't speak. Royce could see she'd been trying to care for the sick woman. A bowl of water sat by the bed. The woman's forehead was damp. He felt the old urge to turn and run, to get back to his quiet ranch where other people's problems couldn't find him. But then he looked at the little girl's face. He saw the same desperate hope he had seen in his own mirror, in his own darkest days. "What's wrong with you?" he asked Clara, his voice rough. "A fever that won't break," she said, her breathing shallow. "Emma's been taking care of me, but she's just a child." Royce looked around the shack. Empty water containers, a few scraps of food. They were starving. "Where's her father?" he asked. A shadow passed over Clara's face. "Gone. It's just us now." People didn't end up here by accident. They came here running. Emma moved to Clara's side, a small, fierce protector. How long have you been here? Royce asked, knowing each question was a step deeper into the pit. 2 weeks, Clara's eyes were closing. But Emma, she's been with me longer. The way she said it made him look at the child again. There was an old pain in her silence. Clara's breathing evened out into sleep. He was left alone with a silent child and 1,000 questions. Emma finally spoke, her voice a tiny whisper. She's getting worse. Royce knelt by the bed. The heat coming off Clara's skin was intense. This wasn't a normal fever. He'd seen this before years ago. The signs were subtle, but they were there. The slight discoloration of her skin, the way her breath caught. This wasn't a sickness. It was poison. Someone was slowly, deliberately killing her. He stood up, his mind reeling. And then he heard it, the soft whinny of the wounded horse outside, a warning. He moved to a crack in the wall and peered out. 3 riders were approaching. They moved with the methodical confidence of hunters closing in on their prey. Emma, he said, his voice low, are there people looking for you? Her silence was all the answer he needed. She was already at Clara's side, shaking her awake. Clara, she whispered, someone's coming. Clara's eyes snapped open. The fever was there, but underneath it was a sharp, desperate awareness. How many in us, she asked. 3, Royce said. You know them? Clara looked at Emma, a silent, terrified message passing between them. They found us, she said. The riders were closer now. The leader was looking at a piece of paper in his hand, a wanted poster. Clara, Royce said, his voice tight. What did you do? Nothing, she insisted. I did nothing wrong. Then why are they hunting you? She struggled to stand, leaning on Emma. Because someone with money wants Emma back, and they don't care who gets hurt. The pieces started to fall into place. The silent child, the woman who wasn't her mother, the professional trackers. And then the leader of the riders called out, his voice echoing in the quiet clearing. We know you're in there, Miss Whitmore. Send the girl out, and nobody has to get hurt. Royce looked at Clara. Her hand found his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. You don't understand, she whispered. If they take her back, she'll disappear forever. The leader's voice came again, cold and patient. You've got 60 seconds to decide. Then we're coming in. Royce looked from the small, terrified child to the woman burning with poison beside him. 60 seconds. 60 seconds to choose between his hard-won peace and a fight he couldn't possibly win. The countdown had already begun. Royce didn't hesitate. He moved to the back of the shack, testing the loose frame of the small window. An escape route. Can you make it? He asked Clara. She nodded, her face slick with sweat. 30 seconds, Miss Whitmore. The leader's voice cut through the walls. Royce scanned the room. A broken hunting rifle hung over the fireplace. A wood-splitting axe stood by the door. Who sent them? He whispered, his hand closing around the axe handle. Vernon Hutchkins, Clara gasped. He's Emma's grandfather. She didn't have to say any more. The terror in Emma's eyes told the rest of the story. Time's up, the voice called. The door burst open. The first man stepped in, his rifle raised. Royce swung the axe handle, a solid, brutal crack against the man's wrists. The rifle clattered to the floor. The window! Royce roared at Clara. The second man pushed through the doorway, and Royce charged, driving him back, the 2 of them crashing to the floor. A shot exploded, splintering the ceiling. From the back of the shack, Royce heard the sound of the window frame giving way. Then the leader was in the doorway, a pistol in his hand, aimed directly at Royce's head. That's enough, he said calmly. Royce froze. The man beneath him scrambled away. Found them! A voice called from outside. The woman's collapsed. The girl's trying to help her. The leader smiled, a cold, empty thing. Bring them back inside. They were dragged back in, Clara barely conscious, Emma clinging to her side. You've led us quite a chase, Miss Whitmore, the leader said. My employer is not pleased. Vernon Hutchkins can go to hell, Clara breathed. That's between you and him, the leader said. My job is to bring the girl back. What happens to you wasn't in my instructions. The casual cruelty of his words sent a chill down Royce's spine. The leader pulled out a legal document. This is a custody order. Vernon Hutchkins is the child's legal guardian. He hurt me, Emma said, her small voice cutting through the tension. The leader's expression flickered. That's not my concern. My job is to return stolen property. She's not property, Royce growled. The leader finally turned his full attention to him. And you are? It was a good question. Who was he? A lonely man who had stumbled into a fight that wasn't his. I'm someone who knows the difference between right and wrong. The leader laughed. Right and wrong don't pay my bills, friend. He signaled to his men. Collect the girl. Kill the woman if she resists. As for our hero here, his eyes were cold and calculating. He's a liability. One of the men stepped toward Emma. Clara, weak as she was, threw herself in front of the child. And that's when Royce knew. He hadn't just been led here to witness a tragedy. He'd been led here to stop one. He looked at the broken rifle on the wall. He remembered something. The firing pin was broken. But they didn't know that. And they didn't know that he knew. Before you kill anyone, Royce said, his voice dangerously calm, you might want to know that I'm not the only one who's seen your faces. The leader paused. What do you mean? My neighbor, Royce lied, his voice steady. He was supposed to come by this morning. When he saw your horses, he rode back to town for help. By now, half the territory knows you're here. The men exchanged uneasy glances. You're lying. Maybe, Royce said. But look around. Those hills are a perfect place for an ambush. Can you afford to be wrong? Clara picked up the bluff seamlessly. And there's something else you should know about Vernon Hutchkins. He's been stealing from the Territorial Land Office for years. I have the documents to prove it. The leader's face changed. Where are they? Hidden, Clara said. Where only I can find them. If anything happens to us, those papers go straight to the governor. The leader was silent for a long moment, weighing his options. His job was to retrieve a child, not start a war or expose his wealthy employer. Change of plans, he said finally. We take them both back alive. Hutchkins can sort this out himself. That was the one thing they couldn't allow. Royce saw the terror flash in Clara's eyes. Going back to Hutchkins was a death sentence. The leader moved toward Emma. Come along, girl. That's when Royce made his final, desperate move. He dove for the broken rifle. Royce swung the useless rifle toward the men, his finger on the trigger, his face a mask of cold resolve. Here's what's going to happen, he said, his voice like ice. You're going to ride back to Hutchkins, and you're going to tell him his granddaughter is dead. The leader's eyes narrowed. Like hell. This shack is a perfect place for an ambush, Royce pressed, his voice deadly calm. And even if you kill us all, those documents Clara mentioned are already with a lawyer in the Capitol. If she doesn't send word she's safe in 7 days, he delivers them straight to the governor. It was a desperate bluff, a story woven from thin air. But Clara sold it, her voice gaining strength. The land office fire 3 months ago wasn't an accident. Hutchkins set it to destroy the evidence. But I'd already copied the most damaging records. The leader's face had gone pale. His job was about quiet disappearances, not public scandals. What are you proposing? Emma dies in an accident, Royce said. A tragic fall. You find a body too damaged to identify. You collect your payment from Hutchkins and disappear. Clara and Emma start a new life, far from here. For a long, tense moment, the only sound was the wind whistling through the shack. Finally, the leader gave a slow, reluctant nod. It could work, but if we ever see either of you again, you won't, Royce promised. They left, their horses galloping away into the hills. The shack was silent. Clara collapsed onto the mattress, shaking with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Is it over? She whispered. It's over, Royce said. In the days that followed, a fragile peace settled over them. Clara's fever broke, and the poison began to leave her system. She was still weak, but she was alive. And as her strength returned, she and Royce began to talk. Really talk. She told him about Emma's parents, good people who had died in a fire that was no accident. Hutchkins had arranged it to get his hands on their land. She had been their neighbor, a friend who had promised to protect their child. And Royce, he told her about his own fire. about the wife and child he had lost to a sudden, violent fever. A fever that had swept through the valley just after a man named Vernon Hutchkins had come through, buying up land for pennies on the dollar from grieving families. The truth was a brutal, connecting thread. Hutchkins hadn't just destroyed her life, he had destroyed Royce's too. Their fight wasn't just about protecting a child, it was about vengeance. They didn't stay in the shack. They knew Hutchkins would eventually send someone else. They packed their few belongings and, with the wounded mare now recovered, they left the hidden valley behind. They rode south, two fugitives and a child, bound together by a shared enemy. They found a new life in a small town 300 miles away, under new names. Robert and Catherine Barnes, a quiet man and a school teacher, and their daughter Emma. Royce discovered that the silence he had once craved was a prison. The sound of Emma's laughter, the warmth of Clara's hand in his, these were the things that made a house a home. The hole in his heart, the one he thought would never heal, began to fill. One evening a year later, a newspaper arrived with the mail. On the front page was a story about a prominent land baron from the Northern Territory, a man named Vernon Hutchkins, who had been arrested by federal marshals. A hidden ledger, discovered by a brave lawyer, had exposed a decade of corruption, theft, and murder. The fire that had killed Emma's parents, the one that had taken Royce's family, it was all there, in black and white. Justice had found its way, slow and patient, like a river carving its way through stone. That night, Royce stood on the porch of his new home, watching the stars come out. Clara came and stood beside him, her hand finding his in the darkness. "It's finally over," she said softly. "No," he replied, turning to her, his eyes full of a love he no longer had to hide. "It's just beginning." He had followed a wounded horse into a world of trouble. He had found a dying woman and a lost child. But in risking everything, in choosing to care, he had found something he thought was lost forever. He had found his own salvation. If you enjoyed this story, I've got another one just waiting for you. Click the video on your screen now for an unforgettable Western tale of courage and destiny. And if these stories mean something to you, don't forget to subscribe. Your support is what keeps these tales from the frontier alive. Thanks for listening.